So my name's Stuart Russell. My official title is Professor of Computer Science at the University of California, Berkeley. I've been there for 33 years, but I've been doing AI for more than 40 years. I became interested when I was at school. I was a chess player. I had a Sinclair Cambridge programmable calculator when I was 12. So I started writing programs on that. And I wanted to make it intelligent, but it only allowed for the program that's 36 keystrokes long. So couldn't really do much with that. Got permission to go to Imperial College and use their giant supercomputer, wrote a chess program, and I sort of got hooked on AI from then on. And why is it so important? Because it's one of the two big questions, right? One is, how does the universe work? And the other is, how does the mind work? So intelligence is interpreted in many ways by many different disciplines and people. From our point of view in AI, what matters is what the machine does. If it has all kinds of brilliant thoughts but never actually does anything, then it doesn't have any effect on the real world. And evolution has the same point of view. Evolution doesn't care if you have brilliant thoughts. If it doesn't translate into action, you're still going to die. So it matters basically whether your actions can be expected to achieve your objectives. So that's the basic definition that we've been using for intelligence. Some people would call that rationality. In economics, that's what they talk about when they say this is a rational actor. It means someone who acts to achieve their objectives. So that's the definition of intelligence that we had at the beginning of the field. And the obvious thing to do was to say, okay, well, that's what we mean by an intelligent human, and so we'll just use the same definition for intelligent machines. Machine is intelligent if its actions can be expected to achieve its objectives. So artificial intelligence is sort of translating this idea of intelligence into machines, right? We had this idea actually long before we had real computers. And in fact, if you go back and read Aristotle, amazingly, so 300 and odd BC, he had the idea that machines might be able to do their own work, that you might be able to have a weaving machine that knows how to weave cloth by itself, a musical instrument that knows how to play itself. And he pointed out that, of course, if we had those things, we'd have a big unemployment problem. We wouldn't need all the slaves that we currently use to do those tasks. So people have been talking about automation, AI, technological unemployment for more than 2,000 years. But I often say if Aristotle had had a computer, he would have been an AI researcher. He would need electricity as well. But he didn't. The next real step forward, I think, was probably Babbage's computer that he developed in the mid-19th century, so 1840 odd. And he and Ada Lovelace, who was his assistant and one of the first people ever to write a computer program, they created a design for a general purpose computer that was in principle as powerful as the ones we use today, a lot slower, but the same basic idea. And they concluded that you could use that computer to do anything that the intellect of human beings can do. But they couldn't build it because it would have required 20 tons of finely machined brass cogs and wheels and levers and so on. It would have been very, very expensive and probably would have broken down every few minutes. So it never got built, and it wasn't really until the Second World War that we got real computers, drawing on the ideas of Alan Turing before the war, and then he was one of the people pushing the technology. 1950, he wrote about how we could use machines to create intelligence. And 1956 was the official beginning of the field when it got the name AI. So superhuman artificial intelligence is a little bit hard to define because there are many different things that we do with our intelligence. We understand language, we move our bodies, we see things, we invent plans, we discover new scientific theories and mathematical theorems. So we do a lot of things with our minds, and it's quite possible that AI systems will exceed human capabilities in some of those, as they already have for games, chess, Go, a lot of video games now. We're beating the human professional champions. And yet, those programs, they can't read a book. The programs that can read a book don't read very well, and they definitely can't play video games. So what we lack at the moment is integrated general purpose intelligence. But it's gradually, that integration is happening step by step. And so at some point, we will have machines that, for all intents and purposes, can outthink a human being in the real world. Not just on the chessboard or the Go board, which are very small, artificial, narrowly defined kinds of worlds, but in the real world, whether it's how do you run a company, or how do you get someone to go out on a date with you, or whatever it might be, the machine will be really good at it. I don't know about the date part, but anyway. The benefits of AI are really like the benefits that we get from being intelligent, except much more of it, right? So if we have superhuman intelligence, we have access to much more intelligence than we get from our own brains. Then, if you think about whatever civilization we've managed to produce so far with our brains, we could have a much, much better civilization in future. And if you think about, for example, what's happened with travel, right? 200 years ago, if you wanted to go to Australia, say, from England, it would be, at least in modern terms, a multi-billion-pound project. Would take 5-10 years of planning and execution, and you'd probably be dead before you got there. Now you take out your phone, you go tap, 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 tap. Relatively speaking, it's free, and you get to Australia tomorrow. So we have travel as a service, and it's become essentially free to get to almost anywhere on Earth. And now take that idea and extend it to everything else, including all the things that are currently very difficult, long-term, expensive projects like building houses, railways, schools, setting up an education system, planning a wedding. For these things right now involve lots of people, lots of money, lots of planning. Different kinds of experts have to cooperate to make the thing happen. And if AI becomes available that is general purpose, then it would have all of these skills. You wouldn't have to have an AI that does wedding planning and an AI that does catering and an AI that does this and that, that builds railways. It would be one general purpose intelligence that knows all of these things, because as soon as machines can read properly, they're going to be able to read everything the human race has ever written. So this notion of being a specialist, which of course we have to do because we don't have time to read everything the human race has ever written, that's unnecessary for AI systems. They can be generalists. And, and the only differentiation you really need actually is the physical robot. So, robot for doing brain surgery is not the same as a robot for carrying 50 tons of rock across the desert. So you had physical differentiation, flying, wheeled robots, legged robots, very dexterous micro-hand robots, all kinds of stuff like that, but accessing the same general purpose intelligence. So you could, with that technology, you could fairly easily create a standard of living for everybody on the earth that a lot of people would find very respectable. And so that's about a tenfold increase in the GDP of the world, happening over a fairly short period. It has happened before. In fact, the last 200 years has been almost exactly a tenfold increase in GDP per capita, as well as the massive increase in population. But that required steam engines, railways, internal combustion engines, aeroplanes, telegraph, telephone, electronics, computers, etc., etc. So we had to have many major kinds of technologies and whole sort of industrial infrastructures to be created to put that technology into effect. This is in some sense one technology that does all of it, and that's really different. So even ignoring the science fiction stuff, like, okay, we could use the AI to cure cancer, to give us extended lifespan, to reach the stars, solve the global climate problem, all those sorts of things. Just leaving out the science fiction, you get this massive increase in quality of life, in GDP, and in just crude cash terms, right? You take that increase in GDP and you say, what's the cash equivalent to that? The economists call it the net present value. It's somewhere between 10,000 trillion and 20,000 trillion dollars or pounds. So that's why people are really, really excited. That's why governments and corporations are investing tens, hundreds of billions of dollars into this technology. And when you look at that amount, an investment plan of $100 billion actually looks tiny in comparison to the potential benefit. There are many misuses that are already occurring, even though at the moment the technology is fairly narrow and not particularly intelligent, nowhere close to general purpose intelligence. So for example, autonomous weapons, what that means is making a weapon that by itself, guided by AI software, can actually go out, find potential targets, decide who to kill and kill them without a human being being involved, except for like giving the initial sort of parameters of the mission. I've been working on this now for about 5 years, trying to convince the big countries in the world that we need to have a treaty to ban these weapons. And the main reason we want to ban them is because an autonomous weapon is something that, because it doesn't require any human supervision, one person can launch an attack with millions of weapons. So they're like nuclear weapons, except they're much cheaper. They can be selective, so you can wipe out, just the males between 12 and 70, or people of a particular ethnic group or people of a particular religious group. They don't leave a huge radioactive smoking crater, and they're cheap and easy to proliferate. So it's hard to see any dimension on which they're not more dangerous than nuclear weapons. And we have enough trouble with nuclear weapons as it is. So this is the argument that we've been making. Major countries, the US, the United Kingdom, Russia, are currently blocking progress on a treaty to ban these. Turkey has announced, actually there's a Turkish arms manufacturer who's selling them, selling quadcopters that can autonomously find, track, and kill human beings. So they are for sale, and Turkey is promising to use them against the Kurds. So things are not looking too bright on that front. And I think there's a major failure of understanding at the level of these governments. They simply don't seem to get what they're letting the world in for. So that's one misuse, surveillance, control. So authoritarian governments are already starting to use AI to basically keep track of their citizens in the way that the Stasi used to do in East Germany, except that the Stasi required almost 20% of the adult population to do this job. And the AI is going to do it for you, so you'll have your own personal Stasi agent keeping an eye on you 24 hours a day. And this is really something that is starting to happen for real in some countries. And in addition to surveillance, then you can also use it for control, because if you know exactly what people are doing 24/7, you can give them a score. you can then use that score, sort of like we use credit scores, except it will be much more pervasive. Your kids won't get into the right schools, you won't be able to live in the right neighborhoods, you won't be able to apply for, promotions, you may not even get the right kinds of jobs that fit your skills because you haven't been a good person according to this automated scoring system that is measuring your life 24/7. So that's, it's potentially a very effective form of control, but it seems to me that it produces a completely lifeless and, for most people, unbearable world to live in. Okay, so enough of the depressing stuff that's already going on. I guess I should mention actually social media as well, because I think that's another really important example. So on social media, content selection, news feed selection, recommendations for what YouTube video to watch next, etc., these are all made by algorithms, and they are learning algorithms. And they're designed to optimize one thing, which is effectively revenue generation for the platform. So they want you to click on things. And you might think, okay, the best way to get you to click on things is to send you stuff that you like, as opposed to stuff you don't like. And that's probably what I think they thought the algorithms were going to do. But the way the algorithms are written and the way they're embedded into the marketing processes of the platforms and the revenue generation functions, what those methods did instead was actually to modify people so that they would be more predictable and therefore better sources of revenue. And it seems, and I think we're only just starting to dig into really what happened in the last few years, it seems that the result is that the algorithms have modified people to have much more extreme, whether it's political views or tastes in violence or tastes in pornography, whatever it is, it's made people into consumers of much more extreme material, and that's, of course, has modified their actual political opinions and their behavior and social relationships. So I think for many observers, this is a catastrophe, that it's basically unraveling our democracies, it may be unraveling our social relationships and our alliances like NATO, the EU, starting to come apart, possibly because of the effects of this system. So, and you can roughly think of these algorithms as 50 lines of code. They're not super brilliant. They don't know that human beings exist. They don't know that humans have brains or political opinions or anything, right? They just, they're blind pursuers of this revenue stream, and they have an effective tool, which is to send you stuff that changes your opinions, changes your tastes, and they learned to send you stuff in a very clever sequence that sort of moves you gradually from one point of the spectrum to another where you're better. You can be monetized better. And this is actually an example of what I see as the general problem with how we think about AI, which is that if you make systems that are either intelligent or deployed on a global scale, or both, and they are tasked to pursue an objective that is not correctly specified, it's either missing important things or it's pursuing something that is not the right thing to pursue if you're the rest of us, namely the human race, then you have this system that is having a huge negative effect because it's the wrong objective, and it's very hard to undo. And this is the case now, even with these simple learning algorithms. If we have AI systems that are more intelligent in a general sense than human beings, it's going to be impossible to interfere with their pursuit of the objective that we've given them. And put simply, if you If you think about what is it that gives us power over the world and power over the other species on Earth, it's the fact that we're the most intelligent. And what happens when we're not the most intelligent, right? How would we maintain power over these entities that are much more intelligent, therefore much more powerful than us? So that's the core of the question, right? It's probably going to happen. I can't say when exactly, but I think most observers and experts would say, you know, we're on this path towards superhuman intelligence, and we're not prepared for success. So we're investing hundreds of billions of dollars into a technology that, if eventually it succeeds, could be a huge catastrophe. So, so basically, the book that I've written, the book Human Compatible, the first half of the book is covering this, sort of what we've talked about, namely, you know, what is intelligence, what's AI, what are the good things, what are the bad things that are happening already, and then what's the risk in the long term. And then the second half of the book is, okay, what do we do about it? And interestingly, so Alan Turing, you know, the father of computing, maybe the father of AI as well, you know, he gave a talk, Manchester, 1951, saying that we would have to expect the machines to take control. So, resignation. And obviously I'm not particularly happy with that. In order to actually answer the question, how do you retain control over systems that are much more intelligent than you, we actually have to look carefully at how does it go wrong, where did we go wrong in thinking about how this technology should be constructed, and then can we go back and rethink it. So it goes wrong because you've got machines that are designed to pursue fixed objectives. The machines are basically operating on the assumption that they have the correct objective to pursue, even when they don't. So to avoid that problem, which is not a new problem, right? We know, I mean, King Midas had that problem. Everything he touched turned to gold. That sounded good, except when he noticed that his food and his wine and his family all turned to gold. So this is not a new idea, right? You put the wrong objective into a super powerful system, in his case, the gods, you know, genies with the lamp, right? Third wish, please undo the first two wishes. You know, super intelligent AI climate control system. You say, okay, you want to reduce carbon dioxide to pre-industrial levels. Great, okay, and the system figures out that, you know, the cause of all this carbon dioxide is people, so get rid of the people, solve the problem, all right? And then you say, second wish, I didn't mean that. If you have a second wish, what I meant was get the carbon dioxide under control without killing anybody. Okay, got that. Fine, then we'll just run a multi-decade social media, social engineering campaign to convince people not to have any children. And then in, you know, 75 years or so, we'll have got rid of all the people, and then we can fix the climate problem. Okay, well, and maybe you don't get a third wish after that. So, so in any situation, a machine pursuing a fully specified objective, unless somehow by magic we actually manage to cover everything the human race now or may ever in the future care about, and get it all into the objective that we put into the machine, you know, and I think that's completely impossible. So unless we do that, we face this enormous problem of basically being in a chess match with a machine where the stakes are the whole world, and it doesn't go well. So what the second half of the book says is, let's not design AI systems that way. Right? Let's not put fixed objectives into the machine. And this is advice actually not just for AI, but many other disciplines that form a big part of our civilization. For example, control engineering, right? The methods that make your jumbo jet fly in a straight line, that do your anti-lock braking system, all kinds of physical, mechanical, chemical plants. They're all run by control engineering techniques. They all assume that there's a cost function, that we know what it is, and we have to minimize that cost. In economics, corporations try to maximize profit. Governments try to maximize GDP. And we know that GDP is the wrong objective. We know that maximizing profit while ignoring externalities is a really bad thing. In fact, you look at the climate crisis, it's the result of a super intelligent machine, namely the fossil fuel industry, outwitting the human race in pursuit of a badly specified objective, namely profit while ignoring the costs to the climate. So we set up this system, this intelligent machine. It happens to have human components, but it's still a machine pursuing an objective that was poorly specified, and they won because they were more intelligent. They executed a 50-year plan to keep pumping out oil and carbon dioxide while subverting the governments so that we couldn't interfere with this process, and they won. So maybe we can undo the mess, but no guarantee. So this notion of putting in a fixed objective is a form of design or engineering that actually doesn't work, except in narrow circumstances where you're absolutely sure that the system can't affect anything outside a small box, like the chessboard. If it's only the chessboard, then winning the game is fine. But if even a chess program, if you say win the game, right? Well, chess players actually do things off the board, right? They nobble the referee, they go to the loo and get on their cell phone and cheat. They try to poison their opponents. They go outside the box. And so it's very, very hard to keep the effects of an intelligent system within very rigid bounds so that you have a chance of specifying the objective correctly within those very rigid bounds. So as soon as anything sort of connects up to the real world, there's no chance of getting the objectives right, because the possible effects of all of the loopholes that the system is going to find can't really be enumerated properly. So, okay, so what do we do instead? What we do is we design machines so that their only purpose in life is to be of benefit to human beings, meaning to act in such a way that human objectives, not machine objectives, but human objectives are satisfied. Our preferences about how the future should unfold are the ones that matter. But the machine knows that it does not know what those are. And that initially sounds like a bug. Like, well, how can it possibly work if it doesn't know what it's supposed to be doing? And the answer is it will know something about what it's supposed to be doing. So if you ask it to fetch you a cup of coffee, then it knows not that fetching a cup of coffee is the objective, right? Because if that was the only objective, then it would be entitled to mow down everybody in Starbucks and anyone who might possibly interfere with the fetching of the coffee, and then bring you back coffee. But of course, that's not what you meant. So that's not the sole objective. What you really mean is, on the whole, all other things being equal, I'd be happier with coffee than without. So what does that all other things being equal mean? It means that if you can fetch the coffee without changing anything else in the world, then it's fine. So the machine can still be helpful to you, even when it doesn't know your preferences for lots of other things. Okay? If the coffee costs money, and it doesn't know anything about your current preferences for money or your financial situation, then it will be reasonable to ask, especially if you're in a posh hotel where it costs £10 for a cup of coffee. It's quite reasonable to ask, well, it's going to cost you £10, is that okay? And that's how the machine will behave, and that's what you'd want it to do, right? To ask permission before messing with any part of the world that it's not sure you want to be messed with in that way. Um, and another thing that this machine will do is it will allow you to switch it off, because it wants to avoid doing whatever it was doing that would cause you to switch it off, because it wants to be of benefit. It might do something that's harmful, and it doesn't want to do harmful things, so it wants you to switch it off. Whereas the machine that believes it has the correct objective actually will do exactly the opposite. It will prevent itself from being switched off, because being switched off, you can't fetch the coffee if you're dead. So, so you get, with this different approach, you get behaviors from machines that you can't get from the way we used to build, or the way we still are building AI systems. We're proposing that this is a different way to build them that has much better properties. In particular, the machine defers to human beings forever. Very straightforwardly, we have to have regulation. So, I think there's a lot of analogies to nuclear energy, because it's a technology that's potentially civilization ending, whether it's in military form or a civilian nuclear power. You look at Chernobyl and Fukushima; these were really serious accidents. And the way nuclear energy works, so civilian nuclear power, there are very, very strict standards for design and operation, fueling, disposal of the whole nuclear cycle. And part of it is to make sure stuff doesn't fall into the wrong hands, and part of it is to make sure that we don't have accidents. And even with that regulation, we still had Chernobyl and Fukushima, which actually decimated the nuclear industry. So with AI, the same thing. Once we have methods that are provably safe and provably beneficial, we have to have strict regulation to prevent poorly designed AI systems running amok, running out of control. There's still another problem, which is, well, what about the bad actors who, they read all the technical papers, they develop their own AI, but they don't want to put the safety part in, right? So they develop some unsafe AI. I think that's a real problem. I don't have a solution for it, but I can tell you that it's going to make the current malware cybercrime crisis look like child's play. So we need to get our act together on that, and then maybe that will help us develop effective policing and control mechanisms. But one of the things we would clearly need is something like the rules that the App Store imposes. So if you want to get your app into the App Store, it has to pass a whole bunch of software checks to make sure it doesn't mess with the other apps or steal data or freeze up your cell phone. And if it doesn't pass those tests, it doesn't get into the App Store, and no one will ever be able to use it. So similarly, I think AI systems that access the internet, for example, should have to pass a whole bunch of software checks. And so along with developing the AI, we actually need to develop much more the technology of, real provable software verification, which means checking that the program meets these behavioral requirements and is literally incapable of behaving or misbehaving, basically. So, so that's one issue. And then the other issue that we need to worry about is the fact that we're sort of lazy, and we might find that it's just too tempting to have the AI system just sort of look after everything for us, which sounds great for the first week or two. But then you get, if you've seen the movie Wall-E, right? In Wall-E, it's like the human race is on this cruise ship that just goes on forever, and they're just passengers. So the machines look after everything, and the humans become obese and completely stupid. They don't learn anything because there's no point. Why would you go to school for 15 years to learn something when the AI system already does it better? And so you could get this situation where instead of doing what we have been doing, which is we pass on our civilization by teaching the next generation more or less everything we know, and then they invent some more, we stop doing that because we don't need to do it anymore. And then that's irreversible, right? We have infantilized, enfeebled species that is essentially completely dependent on its machines. That doesn't seem like a good future, but that's something that would happen because we're myopic. We have this short-sighted way of making decisions, and it's always easier to say, "Oh yeah, you do it today." It's sort of like when your child says, "Oh, Mom, I can't tie my shoelaces. Can you do it for me?" And Mom always says yes. And of course, the child never learns to tie their shoelaces. So in fact, the AI systems, if they're properly designed to be of benefit to humans, they should say, no, tie your own shoelaces, right? They should say, no, it's, human autonomy is a really important part of what it means to be human and what humans want. We don't want to be infantilized. If you ask us now, do you all want to be those passengers on the Wall-E ship where you're obese and stupid and can't do anything? Of course not. No, we want to be a vigorous, well-informed, capable species that is in control of our own future. But that's sort of, that's for tomorrow. For today, please, can you tie my shoelaces? Right? So this myopic behavior will lead us down this slope. So the machines have got to somehow stop us from doing that, but we might override them, and so even override the notion that the machines are looking after our long-term best interests because we're lazy and short-sighted. So that's a cultural problem, I think, and it's happening in some ways already. Machines are taking over some functions, like navigating in cities. I find myself, not bothering to remember or learn how to get from A to B because I know that I can always look it up again. It's a trade-off, right? We only have so many hours in the day, but I think it's a slow, insidious process. We need a cultural response to it. It's not a technological problem. It's up to our culture to re-emphasize the value of knowledge, of learning, of capability, and so on, and to some extent to recognize dependency when we see it, and make it socially undesirable. Well, I think that there are many different actors in this play. I think within the AI community, which until very recently was almost entirely an academic community, and the industrial side has mushroomed incredibly fast. Within the community, which is now split across academia and industry, I think there's a defensive kind of denialism creeping in, right? People don't want to admit that what they're doing, right, the direction they're driving the human race, is actually a cliff. And so they're saying some very strange things, like, well, yeah, we are driving towards a cliff, but we're going to run out of gas before we get there, so don't worry, right? In other words, AI, so all of a sudden they're saying AI is impossible, which is something that, for 70 years, we've been saying, of course AI is possible, and sort of poo-pooing the philosophers who keep saying it's impossible. All of a sudden, now that it actually starts to seem like it's quite likely to happen, some people are saying it's impossible, not for any technical reason, but just because they don't want to have to worry about it. And that seems a little bit odd. So yeah, there is some denialism, but just recently I was in an online debate with some people from Facebook, who were arguing that, these risks are overstated, and in fact, no one would ever put a wrong objective into a powerful machine. That would be, as they said, extremely stupid. And I said, well, what about optimizing click-through? That was a wrong objective, and you put it into a super powerful machine, namely, these giant social media platforms that affect billions of people. And they said, oh, well, we stopped using click-through a couple of years ago. Well, why? Well, because it was the wrong objective. Oh, so you put a wrong objective, you just admitted you put a wrong objective into a super powerful machine. Well, I rest my case, my lord. And so, yeah, there is a kind of, or what psychologists call motivated cognition, which is basically you believe or you reason according to what you want to be true, not what's actually true. And so we have a big task ahead of us to convince everyone that they have to take this seriously, but also to provide a replacement, right? If we're saying don't design AI systems that way, do it this way, but that way, the old way, we have 70 years of technology that we've built up. The new way, most of the technology doesn't exist yet. So we have our work cut out for us.